Hello and welcome back to the series on hole designs, and we're going to start today with probably my favourite, and I know from discussing with many other members of the community, my favourite but not very many other people's. We're going to start with the par 5, particularly the reachable par 5, which is something that's very much a staple of the TGC community, or PGA Tour 2K21 community. We expect to reach a number of the par 5s in 2, but how do you go about making that interesting and challenging? Now, on the course that we're looking at now, which is my Whiskey Run, which is the most recently released, I actually included 5 par 5s, and all of them are reachable in 2, under potentially the right conditions. So how did I go about ensuring variety, making sure that they felt different, and that they play in an interesting way? Well, we're going to discuss that in this video, and hopefully give you a few tips and tricks, and break it down from tee to green. Where can you add challenge? What might you want to bear in mind with par 5s that you might not want to in other holes? And I'm kind of circling the plot and just finding them now. So where might you want to put them in the round? Some interesting things to bear in mind. Okay, and we're going to start by looking at the first Whiskey Run, which is a reachable par 5. And you'll see if I bring up the hole overhead, it's not a very complicated hole. It's really get you away from the clubhouse, and I quite like starting on a par 5. Gives people a chance to start their round well, to head off the first with a birdie, but also you can add some challenge in there in certain places. And you can see with this first hole that there's a ton of width, there's all sorts of space, and this new hole overview feature in the game is great for designing. We can see exactly how far you have to hit it to cover bunkers at particular areas, and so we're going to look at a few of these. Now, the first thing I'm going to discuss with par 5s is the tee shot. And on a par 5, primarily the reason I like these holes so much is because you can challenge people so much more. You can build in so much more strategic interest when, yeah, you're expecting to get there in 2, but you shouldn't necessarily, and you certainly can't consider it a must. Therefore, you can put some interesting danger around the tee and landing zones and the greens and really make that interesting. With this first, we're looking at, can you cover this bunker as far to the right as possible? Gives you, first of all, the best angle into the green. You can see it's better to approach it from there. You get away from that front bunker. Then over here it becomes more in play. So you've got to be thinking from the green backwards, would be my first major tip. Okay, and here we're looking at the 16th. And again, we're going to discuss the tee shot. So here, if we look at the overhead, you'll see that there's only really 1-2 hazards, but this one's working on a short hole that is very much reachable. You can hit down here, and with the longer clubs and the elevation change, you'll definitely get there. 563 yards, 31 feet downhill is very much reachable. But really what we're trying to do is just force the tee shot to be into a tough area. This fairway slopes hard right to left, so you want to be hitting as close to the bunker as possible. And I did this because it's been a tendency of mine to have a par 5 by the cliff and have you really try to carry the edge of the corner on next to the cliff. I want to do something a little bit different. But this one's a simple tee shot, but it's fraught with risk. So if you look at the land, you'll see there's this little shelf here by the bunker, which is ideal to hold on to if you want to be attacking the green, particularly if the pin is located back left. You're going to want to be coming in from over this side. Equally, you can hit this area and funnel down here, and you'll be fine. But if you hit this half of the fairway and you're too aggressive with your drive, you are potentially over the edge. This is probably the meanest tee shot on the course, but that's where par 5s are really interesting. Because you shouldn't necessarily hit in 2, you can drop down to a 3-wood. You've got that option and you're into a safe area all day long. Now you're still going to have to beware of some of the humps and bumps, but make this a free shotter. That's fine. It's an option within your possession. The fact that people are trying to go for that green in under regulation pretty much every time means you can really amp up the difficulty and not necessarily make it unfair, but certainly if this was a long par 4 tee shot, I wouldn't be doing this with the camber anywhere near as severely. The whole principle for me of a reachable par 5 is people are trying to get there in under regulation. So therefore you can require higher standards of both shots, both tee and approach shot. Okay, so now let's talk about the approach shot. Given that the tee shot you can amp up the difficulty a little bit, the approach you can do the same. And I think first of all, the main thing for me with an approach shot on a par 5, there must be some heroic nature to it. If you're going for the green in 2, you want to feel that the shot as being spectacular. So how can you make it that way? Well, we're going to look at the 7th, And there's other aspects that I want to come into on this. Now, the heroic nature is really the blind nature. You're playing over this bunker. You can tell you're not supposed to reach it in two because it's sat down in this, comfortably my favourite green site on the course, in amongst the dunes. You kind of come at it round the right, round from the right even. And there's a really exciting nature of having hit a good tee shot and getting this chance to fire over the dune and hopefully have it roll down into a punch bowl. Now, a punch bowl green we'll come to greens more later. It's a great choice for a par 5 because it really gathers balls in and gives you that eagle opportunity. Now, in terms of this one, the second thing I want to talk about with the approach, if you miss, you can be really penal. This one isn't really. I mean, if you're in the bunker, you've probably got a pretty straightforward up and down. I fully expect this to play pretty close to stroke 18, and for that reason on this hole, if I load up the overview again, the approach is relatively straightforward, so I made sure that the tee shot was really pretty hard. You've got, if you're taking driver with the longest clubs, you are into a really tight, narrow section of the ideal part of the fairway, or you're playing out right, which is actually a pretty good tee shot. Playing out to the right opens up the screen a little bit more, but you have a longer shot in. So I really wanted this, particularly on the stretch of a longer par 4 that had just preceded and a trickier mid par 4. I wanted to give you an easy opportunity, and you've got a long par 3 coming up next. Now, the second thing that I think is vital, so firstly, you can be really penal, firstly penal around the green, have lots of hazards and make missing the green really matter. Secondly, you want to make sure that you've given this heroic element, so are you having the player feeling like really having achieved something for hitting this green in two? You're giving them a shot that matters, that feels exciting. And finally, I think the major thing, and I'll look at another hole to give you this example, is can you encourage people to use the ground to work the ball in? Particularly on the long par, on a par 5 where it might be playing longer, you've got to make the ground game interesting. And links courses are great for this. So for this one, for example, if I'm landing it here, you'll see that the green's all going to funnel in. If we swing around, you can see this contour. This isn't here by chance. This little slope here, so going 3 feet, 2 feet, 1 feet, and down to level. So those 3 feet of change are designed directly to, and you see that slope feeding into the green, feed your ball pretty much towards this pin. Now, whether I'm going to be able to manage that or not, I don't know. We'll give it a go. Got my patented 101% slow, and we're firing it into an area. And I love doing this with par 5s where you can just hit the ball into an area and watch it gather, and this one might just be perfect. So it feeds over those slopes, and down we come, and we would be putting for eagle from a pretty close distance. So that's worked out pretty nicely. We're now on the 12th and talking a little bit more about the approach shot and how you can really raise the danger around the green. Now you'll notice from here, if I go back to the whole overview, I was given a choice off the tee. You can try and hug the left side, which is far more dangerous, and draw it in over here, and that gives you, particularly to these two pins on the left hand side of the green, a slightly better angle. Or you can play slightly safer down the right, which is the best play for the other two pins. Now, what this hole does that some of the others don't do so much is really make you think about whether you want to go for it. Now you might notice that there's out of bounds behind the green, so if you are too aggressive, you're going to end up in some trouble. And the out of bounds makes sense. You're hitting at the cliff, and I worked really hard with the sightline to ensure that it looks like you are hitting to a green on the horizon. You can go for this, and you can probably make it for this back pin, definitely an option, but you're going to have to be really precise. And that's where we talk about you're going for this in under regulation. You're not supposed to get there in two. There's a bunker short that's going to grab you if you are missing short, not too bad. Missing left, not too bad. That bunker might be nasty. Missing way short, not great. Long or right, you are risking all sorts of danger. But with that in mind, with the approach, have I given you places to lay up? Yeah, absolutely. Bunch of space. Now, whether you want to use it when you know that it's only 254 away and a really good shot could leave you kind of gaining 2 strokes on the field, don't know. Different pins, I think you can really amp this up. If it's a front pin, I am bouncing it in here and rolling it up all day long. I've play tested it enough to know that's what happens. If it's a back pin, even better, because you can use that little slope to funnel it just down to where that one is. These two pins on the left, if the pin is over there, generally I'm not going for that in two. I'm going to play out here and just do a little pitch and putt. Maybe if it's front pin, I might try and roll it up gently, but you've got those options. So again, really that approach shot, make it matter. Have some greens where almost this looks like a short par 3 green, because you know what, you really should be approaching it with wedge in hand. If you're going through it with a longer club, you're cheating really and trying to get there in 2. So I can ramp up the difficulty on the green as well, and we're going to discuss that a little bit more as well. But yeah, we can give this one a shot, and we'll see how badly it goes. If we end up long of the green, well, we know we wouldn't have gone for it really. And that one we've got a fast, so that's not quite so good. But if we're ever going to err on the side of caution, we're going to be missing this one left. Let's see where we end up. Oh, heavy rough isn't ideal. And you see we've got a nasty lie and a little pitch, but we do have a backstop. So we could go into a little flop shot or splash mode. And there's different ways in which we could do this. We could funnel it down a little bit here. The heavy rough makes it a little bit less predictable. I'm inclined to go dead at it, and then if it comes out hot, well, I've got the backspin. But again, because I've been able to dial up the difficulty, because it's a par 5, well, that slope's coming into play. Where am I aiming? If I go long, am I funneling down there? There's all sorts of things to bear in mind. Alright, the next thing we're going to look at is the layup areas. Now, we've also got to bear in mind that, particularly with different club sets, now I might be able to reach this with a longer club, and I might be able to bounce it on, but let's also think into a headwind. Well, maybe I can't reach the green. So we want to be thinking about layup options as well. Just because it is a reachable par 5, you've got to provide options for the player to lay up, and the really good ones are ones where you give multiple layup zones, which might be beneficial in different scenarios. So maybe I want to hit it down here. It's going to give me a really good angle into this pin, so let's have a little look at the pin. Yeah, I can play it down here and just funnel it down that slope. But maybe if I play it over here, well, then looking at the pin, I'm coming in from that angle, I've got a little bit more of a backstop there. So if I wasn't very comfortable with hitting pitch shots, I could maybe go that side, but I've got this front slope to contend with, which is rolling away. Maybe that's not such a good idea. Maybe I want to lay up to full wedge distance. So if so, what does that look like? Oh, there's a nice, really forgiving space over here that I can go for. This bunker's slightly pesky, and it's kind of pinching this area a little bit, so that you're full wedge from the ideal angle. So for this pin, you're full wedge from the ideal angle. That's a trickier layup, and I don't reckon there's going to be very many people who try to lay up there. Now, would our layup change depending on where the pin is? Well, if it's over here, that big kicker slope in front, maybe you don't want to lay up over here. Maybe you want to lay up more this side. If it's going up to here or over to here, you're probably going to want to lay up down here. Front, well, maybe we go over here and then we use that tiny little backstop at the back. The point is that your approach and your layups are really tied in with the green and what you're trying to do. But two kind of key rules that I really adhere to is 1, offer multiple layup zones, and 2, the kind of better reward for the layup zone, make it a slightly riskier shot. In this case, it's not necessarily a riskier shot, but you've got some undulations that could kick you all the way down into the bunkers. The layup zone itself isn't necessarily flat, but it's the best angle. So you really want to be going there if you're not getting at the green. If I want to be laying up a little bit further back, well, I'm kind of pushed out here, which, as we've discussed, it's nice and safe, and I can hit from here and roll all the way out. But I'm going to have less than a full shot, so think about how difficult it is currently to control pitch shots. It's not really by design, but that factors into it a little bit more. Or I could be the really safe layup and play back to here. And one maxim that I tend to use when designing holes is always, if someone wanted to make bogey, what's the easy plod way of getting around this hole, taking no danger in? So for me, if I look at the hole overview, let's say I played 3 wood down to here, really minimal danger, although I don't see why you wouldn't play driver. I really wanted you to hit driver off the first tee. So you'd hit driver. If you don't want to go for the green, well, you can lay up there with the 7-iron, play a wedge on, 2-putt, you're making it 5 with no problem. But if you want to make an eagle, you're going to have to take a few chances. And in this case, it's really bringing that bunker into play. So really, layup options, give a variety, have them matter, have them be different. You could even lay up all the way around here, actually. I do remember thinking about this and then thinking, people probably won't go for it. So, yeah, and you'll notice this on many of my holes. There are layup options. Now, it's also worth bearing in mind, it might just be the 1% who lay up to here, but you give them that opportunity and some of them will take it, because if, particularly when we bear that in mind, what we talked about the tee shot, if you've bunkered this area really heavily and someone's ended up in that bunker, you don't want them laying up just to here because you've cut the entire fairway off and given them nowhere to go other than carrying it to the green. We've talked about that before, but think about if you were in the bunker, where would you go? If you're into a headwind, where would you go? Play test on different conditions and see what you're allowing the player to do. Okay, now the final aspect of a par 5 that we're going to look at is the green, and we're going to start with the tee because really the greens should never be considered as separate from the rest of your hole. They are intricately linked, and we're looking at the 17th, which is up there with 7 as my favourite par 5 on this course, and I really do believe that this set of par 5s is the best that I've ever built. I think they use the ground really nicely. I think they're varied and they provide a lot of interest in how you get to the green, and they're real scoring opportunities. Now this one, you'll notice it's split by a centerline bunker, which I've done a bit on this course. It allows you to add more width, and I love doing it for giving people options as to how to play the course. You could go left, which leaves you that angle into this green, or you can go right, which leaves you this one. So because of the amount of width, there's quite a lot of difference, and because the fairway undulates quite a bit, you're actually having to challenge this bunker if you want to go this side, and these two you might roll out into with the longer drivers if you go on this side. It's going to depend on your wind as well. But we're going to bear this whole green in mind based on the angles and how you approach it from this side versus this side. And with that in mind, you'll notice I've drawn two little measure tool markers, one here and one here. And this is something I'll always do when I'm designing, because honestly, the more you get to design from the green back towards the tee, rather than doing your tee shot, putting bunkers down, then putting a green down and calling it a day, it all gets better. So we're going to look at where you might want to be off the tee, particularly with this hole where you can see the flag from the tee. If you can see it the whole way, then you can make choices way back from the tee. And we're just going to hover over the green itself. So this is probably the green that I found the most fun to design, and the green site that was just great. It has this little shelf. It's based on actually an alternative angle at 14 at Pacific Dunes, which I pulled in the LiDAR data for and loved, but while that is a par 3 coming from like this direction was what inspired it, I started browsing around the plot, went from this side and thought this is a perfect spot for a green like that. Now there are things that define this. There's a really big steep swale at the front, which I thought was interesting, because what you can do is if you're coming from this side, well, look at all this area you've got to land the ball on and roll it on. If you're coming from this side, that angle, that is all taken away from you. You're really having to carry it far further than this side. So that was one thing I wanted to play off. The second thing was this kind of tabletop green. Well, I didn't want it rolling off everywhere, but you've got this option with it being on the top of the dune to roll it off this way, roll it off this way, roll it off at the back a little bit. And because it's a par 5, you can do these things without it feeling unfair. If someone hits a really good 3-wood and rolls slightly off the back, you know what? On a par 5, they'll take it. On a par 4, can't do that so much. Now we're going to look at the internal contouring as well, because I spent a lot of time doing this and really enjoy this part. And what I tend to do with pins is I really start with the green and see what slopes I've got around it, and then just massage them into shape. Then you go back to the fairway and go, well, if I was coming in from this side, how is that shot interesting? How are the slopes working? Etc, etc, etc. Sometimes you might have a preferred side of the fairway. For me on this hole, I always wanted the player to go over here, but knew that the majority would be over here. Therefore I wanted it to play more severely kind of from this side and be more rewarding from here. So let's say the toughest pin on this hole is this one, which I believe is pin 2? Pin 3. Yeah, close. Now if you're coming in from this side, well, to get to that pin, you're really just riding this ridge the whole way up, and you're trying to roll it up and through there, and you really can do it. If you're coming at this angle, well, you're coming across that slope, you're firing at this one, you're firing at this runoff. That whole angle is taken away from you, and this little spine is something I've really loved doing recently. However, to this pin, well, look, you've got a lovely little backstop that from this side, that spine, you're kind of playing along it. If you're laterally a little bit off on this side, if you're pushing it slightly right, you're going to have a really tricky putt down that slope. Whereas if you're coming from here, you can kind of fade it in and probably use that slope a little bit more. There's a lot more variety in how you can do this. To add a little bit more interest, I added this little slope, which was a lot of fun. A tiny little half tier that just, I wanted being fairly yellow or orange, but I wanted to make sure that if you're landing on this one, you're probably not making eagle. You're probably not making bogey either, or par. You're almost certainly two putting. But just add that extra little layer of precision needed for this one without being too penal. And I think I accomplished that on this course pretty well. It shouldn't be too punitive. With this back pin, it looks like a really long hole, but provided you can roll it over here, you're generally doing okay. And even if you filter off the back, you're left with a really easy chip and putt for a par. So I think with your par 5 greens, and we'll look at a couple of others, add a lot of slopes to them. Don't make them too severe. Think about how the ball is rolling and releasing, because you want it to release up those slopes and people to use them and encourage people to do that, rather than just, there is nothing worse than, oh, here's a pin. I have only one option, and it's to land it there, and it's a 3-wood, so it's going to roll out to here, and I've got a 20-foot putt, and it's just boring because you've given me no options of how to play this hole. But for that pin, well, I can try funneling it down from here. I can try bouncing it just in this swale and killing it, and then rolling it up. I can try rolling it off this side and getting it in. I can just leave myself a putt from up here. If I leave myself a putt from here, I'm in real danger. If I go long, that's going to be an interesting chip back down. I think all of this is always looking at it and thinking, how can you add interest? Now we'll just quickly, before we sign off, look at a couple of the other greens and look at their characteristics. 7 was a punch bowl, so everything filters in, but there's this little tier in the back that adds a really fun pin position because it's got this backstop in, and I've stopped it in playtesting a number of times about here, here or here, and had really short eagle putts. That pin we played earlier is right in the middle and everything funnels down towards it, whereas pin 1, you're trying to just funnel it down that slope gently enough for it not to run off. And pin 1's here, sorry, and that's pin 4, I think. So pin 1, you're probably wanting to take a wedge into it. The 12 we looked at earlier has this great spine in the middle and this shelf up here, which means that if you land it here and use that little kicker slope here, you'll see that it funnels right the way around. But if you're going long, you've got to pitch back up. I can see this hole playing really interestingly. And you've got this sort of lion's mouth green, the bunker right in the front and centre, which splits it into halves essentially, which are further exacerbated by these little tiers and spines and what have you. 15 is all sorts of funky. It's really got this shelf that you can roll it up, kind of like 17, but then the back portion goes into a tier and a little swale down here. I thought about putting a pin in there, but it didn't really need it, and it would have been a little more artificial than what I wanted. I really just wanted this to be an area where it might collect short putts to allow you to hit an uphill putt. And the final one was the first, which we've seen as well. And again, that's featuring this little diagonal kind of cross tier, a little back shelf, and this mound coming out of the bunker. So in essence, par 5s, if they're reachable in 2, you can ramp up the difficulty first of all, both on tee shot and on approach to green. You can also make the ideal line really well protected. I'm not saying want people to hit the perfect shot every time, but I mean, we know it's a tougher game, but hit into an area that's more well protected versus bailing out safe, and make that matter. Look at where we're approaching from there versus where we're approaching from here. Secondly, think about that approach. How can you make it really challenging? How can you release the ball into the green? Can you give people options as to whether they land short, lay up, and have those options matter again? And then finally, with the green itself, don't be afraid to contour it pretty heavily, but make it fair. Make it so that a good rule of thumb, generally, depends on the type of course you're going for, if you can have a slope that hurts for one pin position, can you make it help for another? So this little spine here, well, on that pin, that's not really where I want it to be, but on this pin, it's a godsend if I'm coming in from this side. With this one, you've got this slope coming here, same sort of thing. This one, it might not look like it's helping at all for this pin, it isn't. But for this one, if I'm laying up out here, I've got a chance of basically playing a little bit left of this pin, and I'm going to leave a short putt. So that's my take on par 5s. For me, because of the variety you can put into those holes, and personally I love playing with holes that give you ground game. So can I land it here, and really think about what's going to happen to that ball once it hits the ground and reacts. And particularly on this course, the amount of times I've landed a ball in this sort of area, 30, 40 yards short of the green, and seen it roll up for a putt, you would be amazed. With this course, it's worth mentioning you need to set the terrain to firm because there's still a bug going on. And for that reason, flip through to this, there are 5 par 5s on Whiskey Run. It wasn't really how I ever intended it. They were just the best holes that I found, and honestly I really wouldn't change any of them. I think they're a great collection, and they challenge you in subtly different ways, be it tee, approach or green. So that's the first in these videos, and I'm going to make it a semi-regular series, and I really hope that it's been enjoyable and useful. It gives you a little window into my view on how to create golf holes, why I've taken certain decisions that I have, and that's really the ultimate thing. People may not agree with all the decisions, but if I as a designer can justify why I've put a bunker there and not on a different hole, why have I challenged the tee shot so much on this one versus others, think about it collectively as a group of 18 holes. I wouldn't want to be making every single par 5 play the same way. If I can justify all of those things to someone at the end of the round, I think I'm in a pretty good place. So there we go. I'm not sure which one I'll do next, but I hope this was an interesting way, and it's certainly my favourite type of hole to design. So I hope it was an interesting way to start the series off. Anyway, catch you soon.